Hi, Erica. Welcome to the Open Door Sisterhood podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
We are so glad you're here. And this is an interesting topic for us to be talking about on the Healthy Way series. We've been doing the Healthy Way for a number of years. And I'm not sure we've ever talked about the role of a church community in being healthy. And this is a topic that you have been looking into, researching, writing about. Why don't you kind of give us the big overview picture of what piqued your interest in this as a topic, and also what you kind of see and observe as you look at the landscape of women and the state of the church right now in the United States?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm fascinated by numbers. And so I am always very curious to see what are the polls saying? What is the data saying about faith in America, in the world? And I happen to be working on another article a few years ago. I'm a freelance writer, so I often write about faith, politics, culture, and the intersection of all those things. And I started to really dig into the numbers in terms of church attendance. And we all know that attendance has been going down for quite some time. But it really struck me when I saw that the number of women, specifically women that identify as Christians, was going up faster than other demographics, or definitely faster than it ever had before. And I was like, well, that's weird. Like, what's going on? Because men had always been leaving at higher rates, but yet that gap in terms of how quickly they were leaving, that was beginning to close, where women were kind of catching up with men. And so I started to explore that, and I started to ask questions like, why is this happening? And what can we do to encourage people to reconsider the faith community that, can be such an important part of your faith life? So as I dug into that, the reasons were layered. There's a lot going on there, and we can get into that. But I was encouraged to find that, it wasn't a bunch of people that were just like, oh, I'm done with God. It was people that really value their relationship with God and value a spiritual life, but maybe had not found the right community for them yet, or had been in an unhealthy place. And so there's a lot in the book about all of that, and, a conversation about how we can maybe find the right community moving forward.
Yeah, because that is actually what I'm hearing from a lot of people, is that COVID accentuated this idea that maybe, and just not just COVID itself, but just all that happened during COVID, it really highlighted that they're disillusioned with the church. And for one reason or another, right? And everyone has their own different reason. The church isn't fitting so much anymore for them. And that's, and they're in this tension because they want it to fit, but it's not fitting. And so they're kind of holding both of these things in their hands. What do you say to those people? Because I think there are many.
Yeah, I think, I like to point out that the original subtitle of this book, which got axed in editing, but I still like to bring up, was "The Church of Your Past Doesn't Have to Be the Church of Your Future." And so many times I think people are coming from denominational backgrounds, or a particular church, or even a particular pastor, or kind of church leadership group, wherever, maybe a geographic area, and they have been hurt, or maybe just disillusioned, numbed out, whatever it may be. And it is kind of scary and overwhelming to try something new. I mean, it sounds simple, but when you think about walking into a new church, even me, as a person who obviously loves church, loves the church, even me walking into a new church, it's a little bit intimidating, because every church has its own kind of vibe, practices. Different denominations may have their own rituals. So I think people are hesitant to take that leap and be like, do I really want to do this? It's a big effort to get up on a Sunday morning and get ready and go somewhere new, especially if you have kids, which a lot of the book isn't aimed just at people with kids, but a lot of the people that will read the book have younger kids even, and that makes the barrier even higher. So what I'm kind of encouraging people to do is to not go out and find the first church enter, but to step back and kind of evaluate what's important to them and what really matters in their life. And I think at the end of the day, I think many people who say they value a spiritual life, which is most women, according to the data, will say that this is important to them. It's just a matter of actually intentionally thinking about it and making the choice to incorporate it into their life in this very holistic way, which I talk about a lot in the book.
Can we just take a pause right now and kind of define terms? Because I think for some people, church means a building you go to on Sunday morning. And for other people, church means it's my community of fellow Christians who help spur my faith on. And those may be people that I meet with on a regular basis, but they might be my book club, or, they might be my people that I spend time with. And when Jesus was walking around the earth, he wasn't talking about a building on a Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. And yet we kind of use that term to mean both. Mm-hmm. So what are we talking about when we talk about church attendance going down? We're talking about the Sunday morning in the building situation. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about needing church or having it be a place where we get healthier and our spiritual life is healthier, what components are required if we're trying to help people think differently? So that's one question. And then how do you define what is healthy as far mm-hmm. as a woman who might be looking for a spiritual community?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it is kind of confusing when you talk about church because, we always like to kind of define it as the big C church and the little C church.
Right.
And the big C church is, the community of believers internationally around the world. Anyone that is a follower of Jesus, is a Christian, would be part of that. You really can't leave that church if you're a Christian. And so we are certainly all a part of that, and you can't have attendance go down there. But the local church, the little C church, is a smaller entity of that larger church where, and it's a gathering of people. It is not a building. Let's be clear about that. The original word for church is ecclesia, which means a gathering of people. And actually, people say it actually wasn't translated very clearly, so it can get confusing. And so the building part gets confusing because you often need a place to go. So the building ends up being that. However, I think that's kind of, in terms of attendance, what we're seeing is that people were only going to the building. A lot of people were only going to the building, and they were seeing, that Sunday morning thing that's church. But church is really so much more than that. And I think there's a real lack of education on what the church is, what God intended it to be, what it's supposed to look like, what our commitments and responsibilities are as members of a church. And so I do try to kind of go into that in the book, because when you don't understand why you're doing something or how it's supposed to work, you may not do it right, and you may not feel very committed to it because you're like, well, what's the point? When you understand the point, that really gets you a lot further. And what I love right now, especially in this time, is that there's such a diversity of churches right now. I don't necessarily mean, across the board in terms of theologically, although there is that, but more so the different kinds of churches. So there's a really big growth movement in terms of the house church movement that's been happening recently. I just am sort of fascinated by that. I love that. For people that have been in a larger church setting, especially if they've experienced hurt or pain from like a leadership kind of thing, house churches I found are really great, not antidote, but just an option, because a lot of times in those, there's a real decentership of the pastor, and it's really more about every person there. Now, I'm not against pastors. I love mine, and they have, their roles, but church doesn't have to look one way, and it doesn't have to be at a mega church, and it doesn't have to be at a little country church. People are creating them all over the place. And I would definitely point people towards the organization Fresh Expressions if you're looking for some of the places like that. What was the second question?
So you kind of touched that there are some elements that make a church healthy. Like what are we talking about when we talk about a spiritual community?
Yeah, so a healthy spiritual community. So I think there's, you know, personal spiritual health, which I talk about in the book in terms of what does that look like? And on that, I would say it's things like having a prayer life, having a faith community, having a gratitude practice, spending time in scripture on a regular basis, worship in some way, shape, or form. So that's like, a short answer component of a healthy spiritual life. But in terms of a healthy spiritual community, what does that look like? And I think that looks like a group of people that are committed to one another, where there is vulnerability, where there's transparency. And in terms of those that are worried about some of the situations we've seen in the past couple of years in terms of abuse and corruption and things like that, I've been really big on talking about how important the church board is, how important that accountability is, that the pastor or the leadership is clearly held accountable, or, I don't want to say like they need a, a babysitter, but just to reassure people like, hey, like this isn't going to happen here. And then coming back to, if something is to happen, it has to be out there. It has to be dealt with very clearly and right away. And if it's not, I would definitely not go to that church. I think that's a clear message. That's not a good place to go. But I think you've got to have people that are showing up for one another and they're demonstrating their commitment and love in terms of, providing for one another, praying for one another. You can be yourself. You can bring your struggles to this group of people. You feel comfortable with them. And that does take time to build. And that's why the church that you do choose to go to is actually a very important decision for your family.
Yeah, I'm thinking right now about how many people have gone to virtual church and online church, right? That is now, people can stay in their pajamas. They, all gather in the living room and people do online church. And it's a great option for people. And yet it's not meeting what you just kind of laid out as a benchmark. It's not really meeting that unless you're doing that in a different way. So talk to us about online church.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were, gathering with a group of people and all watching it together and talking about it, I think that would actually be fine personally. But usually you're not doing that. Usually you're hanging out by yourself, watching it, which is totally not getting you the benefit of that community. I think the embodied community is really important. There's something about being able to touch someone, seeing the expression on their face. There's a level of vulnerability that you're never going to get through a screen. Even if we're talking on Zoom, even if that's part of the experience, there's just something about being in person that opens up a whole other kind of pathway of relationship. And I also think that of course, that God can show up in a Zoom meeting. But I believe that that embodied gathering is sort of where the Holy Spirit moves in such a powerful way. And there's nothing like it. I think it's his favorite place to be, just, from what I've read in the Bible and just getting to know God myself. Like, to me, it just seems like he moves in a way that is like he does nowhere else. And, they say when the Bible says when 2 or 3 are gathered, right? But not when 2 or 3 are gathered, to talk about something random, and not when 2 or 3 are gathered to go work out. When 2 or 3 are gathered to praise and glorify God, he is there with them. And so there's something very special about faith community that you cannot get as a Christian in any other kind of community. And that's why it's so important to show up and meet God there and see what he has to say and see what he has to do through other believers in the body.
What I'm hearing you say is that because you're describing something that I think often happens in small groups, but what I see, especially in bigger evangelical churches, is that, or just even large, other denominational churches, is that people come and they go, right? On Sundays, they come and they go, and they may or may not be involved in a small group. And so what I'm hearing you say is really what I think a lot of people experience as the small group experience, as opposed to the church experience, where there's more of that sharing, praying for one another, and that intimacy. So how do you address that when there's a larger church body that you're attending?
Yeah, I mean, I think going into it, that's why, I think you do have to be intentional when you're choosing where to go to church, because if you want to do this in the way that you're really going to reap the benefits of a faith community, I think you have to recognize that going to church in a building for an hour once a week, leaving and coming and going really quickly is not going to give you that. Now, that's like a consumeristic mentality of church, which of course, like, I like to consume at church too. I like the sermon, I like the worship, but that is really getting only like 20% of what church is meant to be. And so for me, I go to a very small church and I really love that. And I actually do get that community feel on Sunday mornings because there's only about 100 people there. And so I'm talking to half the people there on Sunday morning, and I'm sticking around afterwards, and my kids are running around, and it's very, neighborhoody at my church. And I don't know that I would ever be able to go back to a big church for that reason. However, I think that big churches are important because they provide so many resources for the community, and they're able to offer a lot more kind of like specialized outreach for different groups, like maybe kids with special needs, or, a group specifically for people who've been divorced or something like that. Like one church in my community, they have this like huge food. It's not even a food pantry. It's like literally a grocery store that people that need food just go in and like just get stuff. Like, I think it's amazing. And so with that said, though, if you do go to a church like that, you have to know that, you're not going to get that experience unless you commit to a small group, and they all have tons of small groups. So there's really no excuse. Like, you can find one. And it's not easy. I'm not saying, hey, you're going to go find like your best friends right away. I mean, I have been in, I don't even know how many small groups over the course of my life, and some of them have been amazing. Some of them have been awkward and not great. But it's a matter of saying, this is important to me. This is important to God. And I'm going to put some effort into this because I want to see the fruit of it. And it's glorifying to God when I do this. And so, yeah, that's why this decision is so important. I created a little course for my book launch called How to Find a New Church 101, which I'm giving away for free if you buy the book. So anyway, people, if you're interested in that, that may be helpful.
Yeah. And can I say one other way to do that, to make big church smaller, if you're feeling like I can't commit to a small group, or maybe I'm a woman that goes by myself because my husband and my kids aren't interested, and so I don't want to commit to another group without them, is to be involved in a ministry of the church. And, I used to work at MOPS International, and so many women served at MOPS in their MOPS group, and that group became like a small group. So even though it wasn't titled a small group, they were praying for each other. They were having deep relationships with each other. And so I think there's multiple ways to make big church smaller. But it always involves having those ongoing relationships with a smaller group of people. And you have to be intentional in how you find that. And that can, I think, be through serving in a particular ministry too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most every church has partner ministries that they are working with in the community, or heck, just being a volunteer at your church. Churches always need volunteers. They can't function without them. And so even just being there, say you're there 30 minutes early to help set up or something, like, it's in that time that you're getting to know people. It's just like, coworkers, like, you get to know your coworkers in an office pretty well. And it's the same thing when you're working alongside people in your church. You just get to know them. And that's just part of doing life together, as they say. And a lot of churches, like mine, for example, we have a private Facebook group that's a kind of a prayer request situation. And a lot of churches have stuff like that. So like, I can see when, somebody's got this prayer request about their husband or their son or whatever. So then I see them next Sunday and I can tell them like, hey, how's your son doing? It makes it easier to sort of make those connections and see how people are doing. So that's one way, the digital world has really done great things for us, because we get to know people better and maybe a little bit more quickly than we might have otherwise.
Yeah.
What about when spouses disagree about where to go, or you want to go to a certain spot, but they don't have great programs for your teenagers. And so then that becomes an issue, or maybe the teenagers don't even want to go to church, right? There's all sorts of dynamics that can come in when someone is either choosing a church or trying to re-enter church after COVID. And so how do you navigate that as a family?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to look at what are the essentials and what are the kind of desires or the wants, the extras. And so, you have to look the essentials first. They have to be, sort of theologically sound in terms of what you believe. They're, on doctrine, which you can usually find that stuff on a website. You don't even have to go. You can be like, oh, cross them off. They don't believe what I'm looking for. So I think that's obviously number one. And just for me, I would say, a sermon that is biblically based and, really kind of the kind of message that you want to be receiving. When it comes to your kids, for me, I would say a kids program would rank really high up there on my desires because, we're talking about the next generation. This is an extremely formative time in their life. I want to make sure that church has that. And so I would be willing to sacrifice maybe some things that I wanted more in order for my kids to have, the very best opportunities. And then in terms of spouses wanting to go to different churches, that is a tough one. Sorry guys, this heater just turned on. That is a tough one. And I think that's something that you really have to pray about together. I think it's definitely optimal for families to go to the same church together. I think you're just going to find a lot more ability to connect with other people that are in the same stage in life as you. And then additionally, when it comes to, kind of some of those extras that you're doing with the church, small group, volunteering, that's all kind of come to a head if one person's got to do over here and one person's got to do over here. If you really don't agree, I'd rather you go to church than not go to church. But I do think that that's something that's worth some prayer, intentional thinking, and maybe someone making a sacrifice so that you can continue going together.
Yeah, because if the goal is to be building intimate relationships that are going to extend past a Sunday morning, because let's just keep remembering that's the goal. The goal isn't to just go on Sunday and check it off the list.
Right.
But to be part of a greater mission in your local community, to say, these are my brothers and sisters in Christ, and together we are on mission. And maybe on mission means we just re-energize on Sunday morning and we all go into our workplaces and our schools and our blocks where we live, and we love people well, and then we come back together on a regular basis, whenever that is, Sunday or Saturday night or whatever. If that's the goal, to worship together, to have long-term relationships, then naturally it would be preferable for spouses to be together. And at the same time, we know that for many women, they are the leaders often taking kids to church, and maybe dad is staying home. So can you speak to that dynamic a little bit? Maybe husband isn't interested in church at all, and maybe she's been out of practice, went to church before COVID, then hasn't, and is thinking, this is something I need, that I need for me, and maybe something I would like for our kids too. How do you approach that?
Yeah, well, my life story kind of lines up with that. My mom took us to church my entire life. My dad rarely ever went. And I really, in the book, I give a lot of credit to my mom for really building this foundation. We barely ever missed church. We went to small group. We went to Wednesday nights. I was hardcore member of the youth group. And so she really instilled that importance in me. And, looking back, I kind of, if I was in that position, would kind of feel like, well, you have no excuse. Your mom did this her whole life. But I do focus a lot in the book on the kids, because I am really big on making sure people understand that your kids are going to choose the lifelong faith that they're going to live out is chosen pretty much by the age of 14. If you're going to be, not everyone, of course, but something like 80% of kids that people that become Christians do so before the age of 14. And it's even higher at 18. And so this is a really important time in your parenting journey with your kids and how their faith is going to form for a lifetime. That sounds like a lot of pressure. And sometimes I put that pressure on myself, and I do that in an unhealthy way, like trying to control the situation. But the best thing that you can do for your kids, if you want them to follow in your faith, is to be discipling them at home. That's the most important thing. But the second most important thing that you can do is to take them to a good church where they're going to get all of that reinforced. And so if you're not doing it for yourself, it is really important to do it for your kids. But if you're feeling a drawback to church for yourself as well, even better. And there is a place for you there. Churches would love for you to come. That they want people to come. They want people to be there. They want to be welcoming. And they often are, coordinating these activities. You don't have to plan a coffee with someone. They've got, something going on Wednesday night. My church does kind of random pop-up activities sometimes. Occasionally we'll do like a date night where you can drop your kids off and the parents get to go on a date, and, you get a little bag of stuff, and we offer a little bit of encouragement. And so, I think if you're feeling like do it and you're hearing this interview, that is a clear sign from God that you should take that step.
I'm thinking a lot of our listeners have teenagers, and I've been talking to a lot of moms lately whose teenagers have decided this is not for me. Faith is not for me. And I don't want to go to church anymore. And it's a real tension point because to force them to go at that age could cause a lot of damage, but to not have them go is really hard, right? Because this is what we're doing as a family. And so let's do this as a family. And so there's like two voices that I think I know parents are struggling with, because I've had a lot of these conversations recently. And what would you say to the parent whose teenager is just putting their foot down and they've decided that this isn't for them and they don't want to attend with the family?
Well, I will say I'm no expert on teenagers. I don't have any yet, but I mean, I'll be honest, I'm thinking of like, say, a 16-year-old or something. It would be hard for me to make a 16-year-old go if they were really truly against it. And especially if the other parent isn't going, I don't think really you can say anything at that point. However, I think there are certain things that we do in our families, as families. And if that's the way your family functions, I would probably say, this is what we do as a family. We're just, you don't want to cause a problem, but I think it's just kind of part of this is how it is as part of this family. Now, if it becomes this, if it blows up, I think reassess, reevaluate, pray about it, talk to a pastor or a church leader about what you think you should do. I think every situation would be different. Every kid is different. And so I don't know that there's a cut and dry answer to that. So that's, I guess, not a great answer, but I would certainly seek wiser counsel than me, but certainly think wiser counsel than yourself, because that is a really difficult situation.
Yeah,
it is.
Alex, I'd love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I can just say what we do, because we have resistors in our house. And especially getting out of practice with COVID, it's hard to now say, okay, every Sunday. And so we just don't force it every Sunday. We don't go to church every Sunday. We, like Ericka, go to a small church. So people know when we're there and they know when we're not there. And I love it. I love walking in and knowing the names of people. And I love walking in, and sometimes people will call out my kids from the stage when we walk in, because of course we're late. And the benefits of a small church, I am a small church person through and through. And I think the other benefit of a small church, if you're going to a place where you really click with people, is that your kids get to know other interesting adults.
Yes.
That are not you, that you don't necessarily have to create a formal relationship, like a mentoring thing that maybe you need to do in a bigger church, because you just have to establish relationships. Relationships are established. So, but as far as kids not going, I think what we have said is, as a family, we are members of this church. It's part of our life of faith, is to be part of this community. Sometimes we're going to say we're going to church as a family, and sometimes just it's an opt-in thing. And usually I'm part of the opt-in and my husband's part of the opt-in and our younger kids are, but the older kids can opt out and sleep in. And so it's just kind of a case by case, Sunday by Sunday situation. And we also all, have sports on Sundays. Sometimes we go skiing, the things, the activities that creep in, we have just decided we're not going to say it's Sunday or die.
Right.
Because the life of faith is so much more than a Sunday morning. And if we overemphasize that church attendance on Sunday morning, then we're de-emphasizing, we feel like as parents, we're de-emphasizing the other components of faith that are about living out a faith every minute of every day.
Such a great point. I wish I would have written that in the book. That is so good. I love that. No, I think that's very true. I've never been, I think of certain stories maybe I've heard in the past, people, oh, my dad never let us miss a Sunday type of thing. I'm not like that either. I mean, we do go almost every Sunday, but there have been times when we're just like, we're not going, or, we're out of town, something like that. And so I think I'm with you on that. I really like that approach to it. When they're little, they don't have a choice, but when they're older, you get a little bit more freedom as you get older. And I think not having that requirement every Sunday probably makes them feel like a little bit more free in terms of choosing. So I love that.
Right. And
it gets to the third way thinking. I mean, we tend to we either go to church or we don't make them go to church, right? We make them, we don't make them. And there's always a third way. And that's something we talk a lot about on the podcast. So what is the third way? And to me, that's an example of the third way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And I think from a spiritual development standpoint, it is interesting to be offering our kids this concept of free will. God gives us a choice. We can choose to go to church on Sunday and worship him with our church family, or we can choose to have a quiet time here, or you can choose to sleep in. He gives you that choice. But getting into the idea of health, what's going to be healthiest for us as a family? What's going to be healthiest for you today? And maybe for you today, it is sleeping in because you've been working so hard. You don't have any other morning of the week that you get to sleep in. So I'm going to choose this with you because it's the healthiest way. And God gives us free will. And I think if you start to clamp down, again, this is my opinion, if you start to clamp down on those teenage desires to express their free will when it comes to their spiritual life, you're not allowing for this openness of God can meet you in all of these incredible places. Mm-hmm. And if a kid isn't connecting on Sunday morning, to tell them you can connect with God in so many other places. It doesn't have to be in a pew. And I'll just say that to our listeners too, for you. If you feel like I have tried church and it just is not my thing, I can't sit still, I don't know why I'm listening to this person, nobody talks to me, whatever it is, I feel a lot of shame from my past, I'd say give it a go. And God has people for you, and that is the church. And I want you to find that community, and it might not be on a Sunday morning. I would hope that it would be, because I hope for the church that we are meeting women where they need to be. But I also want you to know that God has people for you, and his people that he has for you are going to help you get healthier spiritually, because that is how he created us to be in community. The Trinity is in community. He is in community with himself, and he wants us to be in community with each other.
Yeah, I would just add, I think I've learned this from other aspects of my life in terms of it's kind of like when you tell yourself, like, I will not eat cookies,
right.
All you want to do is eat cookies. So when you tell someone, well, you have to go to church, well, then maybe they just immediately are going to shut that down because there is no room. But when you do give yourself freedom and you stop with the obligations, I don't think you should look at it like that. And I always think that you should be praying about it. I always think that you should be seeking God about it, but don't give yourself these obligations, because when you do that, you might find later on down the road that you actually want to go. You actually want to participate and have that be more part of your life. And I do think that's what happened a lot in COVID, is people realized they didn't have to go. And some are reevaluating if they want to go. And I think, also we had people that maybe Christianity isn't really what they want to be doing. And so they've left. And so it's always good to stop and intentionally think about why you're doing what you're doing and what is the point in it. If you don't, then you'll just kind of go in a cycle and you're not going to get anywhere. When you figure out the point of it, then you're going to start getting something out of it.
Yeah. So I think as we wrap up today, and is kind of your final word, what would you say as the big why? What is the big why of church?
The big why of church. Well, I think I don't know that there's one, but I think that it is all that God offers us through other believers. We know that the Bible says multiple times that the body is not complete unless every person is there participating in it. He's given us each spiritual gifts. He's given us each callings in our lives. And when we are not showing up, whether that's on a Sunday morning or a Wednesday night or whenever that is, when we're gathering with other believers, they are missing that unique gift that God has given you. And so we're really depriving other people of something God wants to bless them with. That's I think one aspect of it. We're also missing out on the blessing that God may be giving us through another person and through the Holy Spirit that shows up when we are with them. And so however you can prioritize that, whether that is at the mega church down the road or the small church or, the coffee shop, whatever, it doesn't really matter as long as it's this gathering of believers, that you are committed to one another, that you are there to glorify God. And if that's being done, then you're at church.
Yeah. Thank you, Ericka. So appreciate you coming on today. Happy New Year.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.